The courtroom air was stale, thick with unspoken accusations and the cloying scent of cheap polish. It felt a universe away from the scent of oiled wood and new leather that had always defined my office, the office David now occupied with such smug entitlement. My son. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. He sat across the aisle, flanked by his sharp-suited, piranha-smiled lawyer, not meeting my gaze. He didn't need to. His petition, clutched in my trembling hand, screamed his intentions louder than any spoken word. Evelyn Hayes, due to advanced age and rapidly progressing dementia, is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Dementia. The word was a cudgel, designed to incapacitate, to strip me of my dignity, my autonomy, my very identity. And, most crucially, my control over Hayes and Son Timber, the business I had built from a back-of-a-napkin dream with my late husband, Robert, the business I had foolishly, lovingly, handed the reins of to David, believing he shared our vision, our integrity. The shock of it was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, leaving a cold, hollow ache where my heart used to beat with maternal pride. This wasn't just about money, though I knew that was David's prime motivator, his eyes always gleaming with a covetous light when he looked at the company ledgers. This was about erasure. He wanted to declare me non-existent, a flickering, confused old woman who could be conveniently tucked away while he plundered the legacy Robert and I had bled for. The betrayal was a chasm, deep and dark, threatening to swallow me whole. I looked at his averted face, the curve of his jaw so like Robert's, yet twisted now into a mask of avarice and deceit. Where was the boy I had taught to ride a bike, whose tears I had dried, whose dreams I had nurtured? Vanished. Replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who saw his mother not as family, but as an obstacle. A fierce, hot anger, an emotion I rarely indulged, began to smolder in the pit of my stomach, burning away the initial fog of pain and disbelief. Dementia. He thought he could label me, dismiss me, with such a cruel, convenient lie. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten the steel in my spine, the sharpness of the mind that had navigated recessions, hostile takeovers, and the grief of widowhood, all while building an empire. He had mistaken my recent quietness, my willingness to step back and let him lead, as weakness, as decline. He was about to learn, in the most public and ruinous way possible, just how catastrophically wrong he was. This courtroom, this sterile, impersonal arena he had chosen for my humiliation, would instead become the stage for his. The fight for my sanity was one thing, the fight for my legacy, for Robert's memory, for the soul of Hayes and Son, was another entirely. And as that cold, vengeful resolve solidified within me, I knew, with a certainty that resonated to my core, that I would not only prove him wrong, I would take back everything he had tried to steal, starting with his ill-gotten command of our company. The game was on, and this confused old woman was about to make her move, a move he would never see coming. The days following that initial court appearance were a blur of forced smiles for concerned friends, sleepless nights replaying David's betrayal, and the slow, meticulous gathering of my forces. The petition, with its coldly clinical, and entirely fabricated, anecdotes of my supposed confusion, my lapses in memory, my erratic behavior, lay on my bedside table like a coiled serpent. Each lie was a fresh stab, but also a sharpening stone for my resolve. David, my only child, the boy who had inherited his father's height, but none of his heart, had clearly been planning this for some time. I recalled his recent visits, his solicitous questions about my health, his faint concern when I occasionally misplaced my reading glasses or forgot a minor detail. At the time, I'd dismissed it as slightly overbearing filial duty. Now, I saw it for what it was, reconnaissance, the gathering of ammunition for his despicable campaign. He'd even brought a friend with him on several occasions, a Dr. Alistair Finch, whose name now appeared on a sworn affidavit supporting David's claims, citing observations consistent with early to mid-stage cognitive decline. This Finch, I now realized, must have been a hired gun, a medical charlatan willing to sell his credentials for a price. The depth of the deception was sickening. He hadn't just decided to do this, he had plotted, schemed, recruited accomplices. The betrayal wasn't a sudden impulse, it was a cold, calculated assassination of my character and my future. My mind, the very thing he sought to discredit, raced with a chilling clarity. I needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but someone who understood the nuances of elder law, someone with a reputation for tenacity, someone who would see past the surface of a grieving son concerned for his ailing mother and recognize the predatory greed lurking beneath. My bridge partner, Eleanor Vance, a woman whose intellect was as sharp as her bidding, had recently mentioned her nephew, a Mr. Arthur Pendleton, who had made a name for himself defending complex estate disputes. A veritable dragon slayer, my dear, she'd said, her eyes twinkling. Arthur Pendleton. The name had a solid, reassuring ring to it. I made the call. His voice, when he answered, was calm, measured, but with an underlying current of quiet strength. I laid out the situation, my voice trembling slightly at first, then steadying as the familiar cadence of businesslike precision took over. I recounted David's actions, the contents of the petition, the insidious involvement of Dr. Finch. Pendleton listened without interruption, a skill I deeply appreciated. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his tone now resonating with a controlled indignation that mirrored my own, what your son is attempting is not only morally reprehensible, it is a gross abuse of the legal system. We will fight this, and we will expose it for what it is. His claim of your dementia will be the very thing that unravels him. His words were a balm, a validation. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I had found my loyal legal ally. The strategic planning began immediately. Pendleton outlined the need for independent medical evaluations, character witnesses, and a thorough investigation into David's recent activities, both personal and professional, particularly concerning Hayes and Son Timber. He suspected, as I did, that this power grab was linked to something more than just controlling my personal assets. It was about unfettered control of the company, perhaps to cover up mismanagement, or worse. The thought that David might be destroying the business Robert and I had poured our souls into added another layer of cold fury to my determination. The internal monologue that had been a whirlwind of pain and disbelief now shifted into a focused, almost militaristic mode. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover, and the target was my own son. This battle would be fought on two fronts: the courtroom, to dismantle his lies about my mental state, and then, once my lucidity was irrefutably established, the boardroom, to reclaim my company. The roses Robert had planted in the garden outside my window, their thorns sharp and resilient, seemed to stand as a silent testament to the fight ahead. They, like me, had weathered storms and bloomed again. And bloom again, I would. The weeks leading up to the competency hearing were a strange blend of quiet introspection and intense, focused activity. Arthur Pendleton, my dragon-slaying lawyer, moved with an efficiency that was both reassuring and formidable. He arranged for me to see two independent neurologists, both highly respected in their fields, for comprehensive cognitive assessments. These were not cursory chats, they were hours-long batteries of tests, probing questions, and meticulous evaluations. I found the process draining, but also oddly invigorating. Each question I answered correctly, each complex problem I solved, each memory I recounted with clarity, was another nail in the coffin of David's deceitful narrative. The neurologists, Dr. Ramirez and Dr. Chen, were professional and empathetic, their reports, when they came, unequivocal, no evidence of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. Mrs. Hayes exhibits superior cognitive function. For her age, these documents became my shield and my sword. While the medical evaluations were underway, Pendleton's team was delving into David's recent stewardship of Hayes and Son Timber. He'd assigned a forensic accountant, a quiet, unassuming woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had a reputation for unearthing financial skeletons. Her initial findings, relayed to me by Pendleton, were disturbing. David had been taking out large, unsecured loans against company assets, investing in risky ventures outside our core business, and his personal expenses, charged to the company, were exorbitant. He was treating Hayes and Son like his personal piggy bank, bleeding it dry. The motive for his dementia claim became starkly, sickeningly clear. If I were declared incompetent, he would have unchecked access, free to continue his reckless plundering until there was nothing left but a hollow shell. The rage this ignited in me was a cold, steady fire. This wasn't just about my freedom, it was about protecting the legacy Robert and I had built, the livelihoods of the hundreds of loyal employees who depended on Hayes and Son. I thought of old Tom Jenkins, our first foreman, who had worked alongside Robert for 30 years, his son and grandson now also with the company. What would happen to them if David's greed ran its course? This realization added a desperate urgency to my fight. My internal monologue became a running commentary on strategy, on anticipating David's next move, on preparing my own testimony. Pendleton coached me, not on what to say, but on how to remain calm, how to present my truth with unwavering clarity, even under the hostile cross-examination I would inevitably face from David's piranha. They will try to fluster you, to twist your words, to make you seem confused, he warned. Your strength lies in your lucidity, your consistency. Let them hang themselves with their own baseless accusations. The image was a grimly satisfying one. I also spent hours sifting through old company records, my own journals, photographs, anything that could paint a picture of my lifelong involvement and competence. I found the original business plan Robert and I had sketched out on a series of restaurant napkins, our youthful optimism practically leaping off the faded paper. I found records of key decisions I had made after Robert's death, decisions that had steered the company through turbulent waters and ensured its continued success. These weren't the actions of a woman descending into dementia, they were the strategic moves of a seasoned leader. The emotional symbolism of these artifacts was potent, they were tangible proof of my life's work, the very work David was trying to negate. The legal power turns were subtly beginning, even before we stepped back into court. We were building an unassailable fortress of facts, while David, I suspected, was relying on little more than his own arrogance and the purchased testimony of his disreputable Dr. Finch. The slow burn of my anger was now channeled into a laser-like focus. The courtroom would be my stage, and I was preparing for the performance of a lifetime, a performance that would not only exonerate me, but would also lay the groundwork for the second act, the reclaiming of my business. The day of the competency hearing arrived, not with the dread of the first appearance, but with a cold, focused resolve. I chose my attire with care, a tailored suit in a deep sapphire blue, the color of clarity and authority, a string of pearls Robert had given me, a symbol of enduring value. As I walked into the courtroom, my head held high, Arthur Pendleton at my side, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't anticipated. The piranha, David's lawyer, whose name was Miss Carmichael, gave me a look that was meant to be intimidating, but I met her gaze steadily, a faint, almost pitying smile on my lips. She had no idea what was coming. David, again, avoided eye contact, his face pale, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the courtroom's chill. He looked less like a concerned son and more like a cornered rat. The proceedings began with David's side presenting their evidence. Dr. Alastair Finch took the stand, a portly man with shifty eyes and an overly earnest demeanor. He recounted his observations of my supposed cognitive decline, citing instances of my forgetfulness and disorientation, all cleverly twisted misinterpretations of perfectly normal, everyday occurrences, or outright fabrications supplied by David. Ms. Carmichael guided him through his testimony with practiced ease, painting a picture of a frail, confused old woman desperately in need of her son's intervention. I listened, my expression impassive, but inside, the cold fire burned brighter. Then it was Pendleton's turn to cross-examine. He rose, a quiet, almost understated figure, but his questions, when they came, were like precision-guided missiles. He began gently, lulling Finch into a sense of complacency, then, with surgical skill, he started to dismantle Finch's credibility. He questioned Finch's qualifications, his prior disciplinary record, which Pendleton's team had, of course, unearthed, his financial relationship with David. Under Pendleton's relentless, incisive questioning, Finch began to unravel. His answers became evasive, his composure frayed. He stammered, contradicted himself, his shifty eyes darting towards David for reassurance that wasn't forthcoming. The dramatic reveal of Finch's lack of credibility was a masterpiece of courtroom theatre. Pendleton produced sworn affidavits from two of Finch's former colleagues, attesting to his reputation for flexible ethics and diagnoses for hire. The piranha, Miss Carmichael, objected repeatedly, her voice growing shriller, but the judge, a stern-faced woman with intelligent eyes, overruled her each time, her own expression growing increasingly skeptical of Finch's testimony. By the time Pendleton was finished, Dr. Alastair Finch looked less like a medical expert and more like a cheap conman exposed under a harsh spotlight. His purchased testimony lay in tatters. The first burst of tension in the courtroom had ended with a decisive victory for our side. Next, Pendleton called Dr. Ramirez and Dr. Chen. Their testimony was clear, concise, and utterly damning to David's case. They presented their findings, their detailed reports, their unequivocal conclusions about my cognitive health. Ms. Carmichael's attempts to discredit them during cross-examination were feeble, almost laughable. These were experts of impeccable reputation, their findings unassailable. The on-screen text, as it were, of their qualifications and the weight of their medical pronouncements filled the courtroom with an undeniable truth. The rhythmic and deliberate beats of their professional presentation contrasted sharply with Finch's flustered evasiveness. The tide was turning, visibly, palpably. David's face, when I chanced to glance, was ashen. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning panic. He had built his case on a foundation of lies, and that foundation was now crumbling before his eyes. The tension in the courtroom was thick, but it was no longer the tension of my fear, but of his impending doom. The pivotal moment, the one I had both dreaded and meticulously prepared for, was my own testimony. As I walked to the stand, I could feel David's eyes on me, a desperate, almost pleading look now, but it was too late for regret, too late for filial piety. He had made his bed of deceit, and now he would be forced to lie in it. Arthur Pendleton guided me through my initial testimony with gentle precision, allowing me to tell my story, to outline my lifelong involvement with Hayes and Son, my current activities, my mental acuity. I spoke clearly, my voice steady, recounting details, dates, and complex business decisions with an ease that directly contradicted David's narrative of a confused, declining mind. I presented the faded napkins bearing our first business plan, the meticulously kept ledgers from the early years, the strategic documents I had authored after Robert's death. Each exhibit was a silent rebuttal to David's claims. Then came Ms. Carmichael's cross-examination. The piranha bared her teeth, her questions sharp, designed to trip me up, to provoke an emotional outburst, to elicit a moment of confusion she could pounce upon. She brought up trivial instances of forgetfulness. David had supplied a misplaced set of keys, a momentarily forgotten name at a crowded party. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, isn't it true that these moments of forgetfulness are becoming more frequent? Isn't it true that you sometimes feel lost? I met her gaze calmly. Miss Carmichael, I replied, my tone even, it is true that I occasionally misplace my keys. I believe that is a common human experience, not a symptom of dementia. As for feeling lost, the only time I have felt truly lost recently is when I realized my own son was trying to steal my life from me under the guise of concern. My sharp comeback hung in the air, the courtroom utterly silent. Ms. Carmichael, momentarily flustered, pressed on, trying to paint my active involvement in charity boards and my continued consultation on complex business matters as meddling or delusional grandeur, but with each question, I calmly, rationally, dismantled her assertions, providing concrete examples, logical explanations. I could feel the judge's gaze on me, intense, appraising. I wasn't just defending my sanity. I was demonstrating it, in real time, under immense pressure. The internal monologue that had rehearsed these moments countless times now flowed effortlessly into spoken words, my language intimate and personal when speaking of my life and family, yet sharp and precise when discussing business. The dramatic power shift was palpable. The narrative David had tried to construct was being systematically deconstructed, replaced by the undeniable truth of my competence. Pendleton, during his redirect, then delivered the coup de grace. He introduced Sarah Jenkins, the forensic accountant. Her testimony was a quiet, methodical demolition of David's stewardship of Hayes and Son. She detailed the reckless spending, the questionable loans, the alarming depletion of company reserves, all under David's watch since he had assumed operational control. She presented charts, graphs, bank statements, irrefutable evidence of his mismanagement, bordering on outright fraud. The implication was clear. David's attempt to declare me incompetent was not born of concern for my health, but of a desperate need to gain unfettered control of the company's finances, likely to cover his tracks or continue his plundering. This dramatic reveal of his true motives, laid bare before the court, was devastating. David slumped in his chair, his face grey, his eyes staring blankly ahead. Ms. Carmichael's objections became increasingly desperate, increasingly futile. The judge listened intently, her expression grim. The fierce, emotional stakes of this battle were now fully exposed, not just a family squabble, but a calculated attempt at elder abuse and corporate malfeasance. My son, my betraying family member, was being unmasked, his carefully constructed facade of the dutiful son shattered into a million pieces. The tension in the courtroom was at its peak, the air thick with the impending judgment. The judge, a woman whose name, I later learned, was Honourable Eleanor Ainsworth, a serendipitous echo of my friend Eleanor Vance, did not deliberate for long. After a brief recess, she returned to the bench, her expression stern, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom before settling on David. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic, shallow breathing I could hear from David's direction. This court, Judge Ainsworth began, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the charged atmosphere, has heard extensive testimony and reviewed considerable evidence regarding the petition brought by Mr. David Hayes concerning the competency of his mother, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes. She paused, her eyes lingering on me for a moment with something that looked almost like respect, before turning back to David, her expression hardening. The claims of cognitive decline and dementia made against Mrs. Hayes are, in the opinion of this court, entirely without merit. In fact, the evidence strongly suggests the opposite. Mrs. Hayes has demonstrated remarkable lucidity, intelligence, and a profound understanding of her personal and business affairs. A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped my lips. Arthur Pendleton gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice now laced with a steely disapproval, the court finds the timing and nature of this petition deeply troubling, particularly in light of the evidence presented regarding the financial management of Hayes and Son timber under Mr. David Hayes's direction. David visibly flinched. Ms. Carmichael looked down at her notes, her predatory demeanor completely deflated. The petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed, with prejudice, Judge Ainsworth declared, her words like hammer blows. This court finds Mrs. Evelyn Hayes to be fully competent to manage her own affairs. Moreover, I will be referring the testimony regarding the financial irregularities at Hayes and Son Timber to the relevant authorities for further investigation. The finality of her pronouncement echoed through the courtroom. Dismissed. With prejudice. And an investigation. It was more than I had dared to hope for. The catharsis was immense, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. I had not only defended my sanity, I had exposed David's treachery. The shocked betrayal I had felt weeks ago was now replaced by a fierce, triumphant vindication. David sat slumped in his chair, his face ashen, the picture of utter defeat. His attempt to paint me as a confused old woman had backfired spectacularly, revealing him instead as a deceitful, manipulative, and quite possibly criminal son. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. As the judge adjourned the court, there was a stunned silence, then a low murmur broke out. Arthur Pendleton helped me to my feet. "We did it, Evelyn," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips. "You did it." I looked across the aisle at my son. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. In his, I saw not remorse, not yet, but a dawning terror, the look of a man whose carefully constructed world had just imploded. In mine, I hoped he saw not just victory, but the unwavering resolve of a mother who, pushed to the brink, had found the strength to fight for her life, her legacy, and her truth. The battle for my mind was won. The battle for my business was about to begin. The fierce, emotional tone of this victory was empowering, a surge of strength that prepared me for the next, equally crucial phase of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The roses of revenge were beginning to bloom, and their fragrance was justice. The courtroom victory, as monumental as it was, felt like merely the first act in a much larger play. The judge's pronouncement of my competence was a vindication, yes, but the sting of David's betrayal, the cold, calculated nature of his attack, lingered. More pressingly, the revelation of his disastrous mismanagement of Hayes and Son Timber demanded immediate and decisive action. The very legacy Robert and I had poured our lives into was teetering on the brink thanks to his greed and incompetence. Arthur Pendleton, ever the pragmatist, had already anticipated this next phase. "Evelyn," he'd said, as we left the courthouse, the scent of impending rain in the air, "your competency is established. Now, we address the matter of the company. The judge's referral for investigation will take time. We need to act more swiftly to staunch the bleeding." My mind, freed from the immediate threat of the conservatorship, was already several steps ahead. During my nocturnal strategic planning sessions in the weeks prior, I had not only focused on defending my sanity, but also on how to legally and decisively reclaim control of Hayes and Son. Robert, bless his foresight, had structured the company's shares in a way that, while giving David operational control as CEO after my semi-retirement, had left me with a significant, ultimately controlling, interest, particularly if certain financial covenants were breached. Covenants David, in his reckless pursuit of quick profits and lavish living, had almost certainly violated. Sarah Jenkins, the forensic accountant, became my covert operative within the company. Quietly, discreetly, she continued to gather evidence, her reports painting an increasingly grim picture of David's malfeasance. He hadn't just made a few bad investments, he had systematically mortgaged the company's future, leveraging its assets to the hilt, creating a complex web of debt and risky ventures that were far removed from our core timber business. He had, in essence, treated Hayes and Son as his personal ATM and gambling fund. The dry, Poetic justice of it all was that his attempt to prove me mentally unfit was precisely what had brought his own gross incompetence into the harsh light of day. Had he left well enough alone, he might have continued his charade for longer. But his greed, his arrogance, had been his undoing. The common device of the legal power turn was about to be deployed with devastating precision. Pendleton and I, along with Sarah, spent hours poring over company bylaws, loan agreements, and shareholder compacts. The path to removing David was complex, but clear. It involved calling an emergency board meeting, presenting the irrefutable evidence of his mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty, and exercising my rights as the majority shareholder. The emotional symbolism was potent. The business, which David viewed as a mere vehicle for his enrichment, was for me an extension of my family, a living testament to Robert's vision and my own life's work. Taking it back was not just a financial imperative, it was a moral one. I thought of the empty chair at the head of the boardroom table, the one Robert had occupied, then I, then David. Soon, it would be mine again, not as a figurehead, but as an active, engaged leader, ready to undo the damage and restore the company's integrity. The foreshadowing of David's downfall, which had begun with his nervous demeanor in court, was now rapidly approaching its climax. He was, I knew, reeling from the court's decision, likely scrambling to understand how his meticulously laid plans had gone so disastrously wrong. He was about to discover that the ruling on my competency was merely the opening salvo in a war he was now destined to lose spectacularly. The slow burn with bursts of tension and victory was shifting into its next, decisive phase. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, less than a week after the court ruling. David, by law, had to be notified, as did the other two board members, old friends of Robert's, solid, respectable men who had, I suspected, been largely kept in the dark by David's smooth deceptions. The atmosphere in the Hays and Son boardroom, a room I had designed myself with warm oak paneling and large windows overlooking the timber yard, was thick with a tension that was almost palpable. David sat at the head of the table, his usual arrogance replaced by a sullen, resentful demeanor. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot. Miss Carmichael, his piranha lawyer, sat beside him, her expression stony, clearly not relishing this new battlefront. I sat opposite David, flanked by Arthur Pendleton and Sarah Jenkins, our team radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. The emotional contrast between our composed preparedness and David's agitated defensiveness was stark. I called the meeting to order, my voice calm and steady, a lifetime of chairing meetings, negotiating deals, and making tough decisions flowing back as if no time had passed. Gentlemen, I began, my gaze sweeping over the board members before settling on my son, we are here today to discuss matters of grave concern regarding the stewardship and financial health of Hays and Son Timber under the current CEO, Mr. David Hays. David scoffed. A harsh, dismissive sound. This is a farce, mother. A vindictive charade because you lost a legitimate concern about my competency, David. I interjected, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. The competency which the court has unequivocally affirmed. No, this is not about that. This is about your flagrant breach of fiduciary duty, your reckless endangerment of this company, and your systematic plundering of its assets. Sarah Jenkins then took the floor. With meticulous, unemotional precision, she presented her findings. Slide after slide detailed the unauthorized loans, the failed speculative ventures, the exorbitant personal expenses disguised as company costs, the dangerously low cash reserves. She presented documents, bank statements, internal memos David had clearly thought would never see the light of day. The on-screen text of her presentation was a damning indictment, each bullet point another nail in David's professional coffin. The other two board members, initially looking bewildered, grew increasingly grim-faced as the extent of David's malfeasance was laid bare. Their shocked whispers and exchanged glances spoke volumes. Ms. Carmichael attempted to interject, to discredit Sarah's findings, but Pendleton, with his quiet authority and encyclopedic knowledge of corporate law, shut her down at every turn. The legal power turns were swift and brutal. When Sarah finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room. I let it hang for a moment, allowing the full weight of the evidence to sink in. Then, I spoke. "David," I said, my voice no longer just calm, but imbued with the fierce, righteous anger I had suppressed for so long, "you were entrusted with a legacy, a company built on integrity, hard work, and a commitment to its employees and community. You have betrayed that trust. You have treated Hayes and Son as your personal fiefdom, and you have brought it to the brink of ruin." I paused, my gaze unwavering. "Therefore, pursuant to the company bylaws and my rights as majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in you as CEO and Chairman of the Board. Furthermore, I am proposing my own reinstatement as CEO and Chair, effective immediately, to salvage what is left of this company and restore it to sound financial footing." The shock on David's face was absolute. He had clearly believed that, despite the court ruling, he could somehow retain control of the business. He opened his mouth to speak, to argue, but no words came out. He looked to Ms. Carmichael, but she offered no assistance, her expression one of grim resignation. The vote was a formality. The other two board members, their faces etched with disappointment and anger at David's betrayal, voted with me. It was unanimous. David Hayes was out. The dry, poetic justice of it was almost too perfect. He had tried to oust me from my own life. Instead, he had been ousted from the very position he had schemed so despicably to secure. The triumph was not just mine, it was a triumph for the integrity of Hayes and Son, for the memory of Robert, for the future of all the loyal employees whose livelihoods he had jeopardized. The triumphant emotional tone was amplified by the sheer, strategic elegance of his downfall. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and decisive. David, stripped of his titles and his power, was escorted from the premises, his personal effects packed into a single, ignominious cardboard box. The sight of him, shoulders slumped, face a mask of disbelief and fury, walking away from the company he had tried to destroy, was a stark visual metaphor for his complete and utter defeat. There was no gloating on my part, only a profound sense of relief and a steely determination to begin the arduous task of rebuilding. Ms. Carmichael, after a brief, terse exchange with Arthur Pendleton regarding severance, which, given the circumstances, was minimal and strictly by the book, also departed, her piranha smile decidedly absent. The air in the boardroom, once thick with tension and deceit, seemed to clear, becoming lighter, more breathable. The remaining board members, though still shaken by the revelations, pledged their full support. My first act as reinstated CEO was to address the senior management team, many of whom I had known and worked with for decades. I laid out the situation honestly, acknowledging the damage David had inflicted, but also expressing my unwavering confidence in our collective ability to restore Hayes and Son to its former strength. Their relief and renewed loyalty were palpable. The news of my return and David's ousting spread through the company like wildfire, and the overwhelming sentiment was one of relief and quiet celebration. It seemed David's arrogant and dismissive management style had won him few friends. Sarah Jenkins, my quiet forensic accountant, agreed to stay on as interim CFO, her expertise invaluable, as we began the painstaking process of untangling David's financial mess, renegotiating with creditors, and shoring up the company's foundations. The legal empowerment I had wielded in the courtroom and the boardroom now translated into practical, decisive action. The rhythmic and deliberate beats of my leadership style, honed over decades, quickly reasserted themselves. Long hours were spent in meetings, poring over spreadsheets, making tough decisions. It was exhausting, demanding work, but it was also exhilarating. I felt alive, purposeful, my mind sharper and more engaged than it had been in years. The challenge of saving Hayes and Son, the very entity David had tried to use as a tool to discredit me, became my focus, my new passion. The irony was not lost on me. In trying to prove me incapable, he had inadvertently handed me back the reins of the company I loved, giving me the opportunity to prove just how capable I truly was. The empty chairs that had once symbolized loss now represented a clean slate, an opportunity to rebuild with integrity and vision. I began to implement changes, streamlining operations, cutting wasteful expenditure, starting with the cancellation of David's many vanity projects and extravagant corporate perks, and reinvesting in our core timber business, the heart and soul of Hayes and Son. The language style of my communications was direct, honest, and infused with a renewed sense of purpose. I was not just a caretaker. I was a restorer, a builder, once again shaping the destiny of the company Robert and I had founded. The slow burn justice was now translating into tangible, positive change, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of truth. The final chapter of this saga was not written in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in the quiet, steady resurgence of Hayes and Son Timber. Under my renewed leadership, and with the dedicated efforts of a revitalized team, the company began to heal. The process was arduous. We faced skeptical creditors, nervous suppliers, and employees weary of uncertainty. But transparency, hard work, and a clear, ethical vision began to turn the tide. We renegotiated David's disastrous loans, divested from his reckless side ventures, and refocused on what we did best, providing quality timber products with integrity and excellent service. Slowly, surely, the financial health of Hayes and Son began to improve. The red ink on the ledgers turned to black. Morale, once at rock bottom, soared. There was a renewed sense of pride, of shared purpose. The investigation into David's activities by the authorities proceeded, a separate track of justice that would run its own course. I did not follow it with any particular relish, only a detached sense of inevitability. My focus was on the future, on rebuilding, on ensuring that the legacy Robert and I had created would not only survive but thrive. I did hear, through the grapevine, that David was facing significant legal troubles, his reputation in tatters, his career prospects bleak. There was no joy in this, only a somber acknowledgement that he had reaped what he had sown. His betrayal had cost him everything. As for me, I found a profound satisfaction in the daily challenges and triumphs of running the company. The work was demanding, but it was meaningful. The scent of freshly cut timber, the hum of the sawmill, the camaraderie of the employees, these were the things that had always defined Hayes and Son, and they were now restored, vibrant and strong. My office, the one David had briefly, arrogantly occupied, once again felt like my own, a place of focused energy and strategic thought. The dry, poetic justice was complete. He had tried to confine me to a powerless existence, convinced of my decline, and in doing so, had catapulted me back into the most powerful and engaged phase of my recent life. The roses blooming as revenge took the form of a flourishing business, a testament to ethical leadership and resilience. The innocent grandchild figure, in a way, was the company itself, rescued from a damaging influence and nurtured back to health. My loyal legal ally, Arthur Pendleton, remained a trusted advisor, and Sarah Jenkins became my permanent, indispensable CFO. We made a formidable team. One afternoon, months later, as I walked through the timber yard, the sun warm on my face, I paused to watch a new shipment of prime logs being unloaded. Old Tom Jenkins's grandson, young Mark Jenkins, now a shift supervisor, caught my eye and gave me a wide, genuine smile and a thumbs up. In that simple gesture, I saw the culmination of everything I had fought for. It wasn't just about proving my sanity or reclaiming a business. It was about preserving a community, a way of life, a legacy of integrity. The fierce, emotional, vengeful, and ultimately triumphant journey had reached its conclusion. I had faced down betrayal, stared into the abyss of erasure, and emerged not only victorious but revitalized. My son had tried to claim I had dementia in court. Instead, I had proven him catastrophically wrong, and in the process, I had taken back not just his ill-gotten business, but my own power, my own voice, and my own unshakable place in the world. And Hayes and Son Timber, under the steady hand of its founder, was stronger than ever.